The crystal clink of champagne flutes hadn't even faded when my wife raised her glass and detonated what might as well have been a grenade in a Hugo Boss dress. "To the real backbone of this company, my boss," she said, standing center stage in that shimmering blue dress I paid for. "Thomas, you're just the checkbook. The brain? He's sitting right here." I was 6 feet away, at the bar, 3 fingers into a Highland Park 18. The ice didn't even have time to melt before the laughter rolled through the ballroom. Not a polite chuckle. A real one. Raw. From the gut. Executives making $200,000 plus a year howling like she just delivered the punchline of a TED Talk titled, "How to Castrate Your Husband in Public." Even the CFO, the same man I pulled out of IRS hell in 2017, smirked into his glass and muttered something to the VP of Ops. They both looked at me, and then looked away. Vanessa didn't look at me at all. She turned back to her boss, Greg Whitmore, with his aggressively white veneers and junior senator handshake, and winked. He stood, adjusted his cufflinks, and gave a little bow like a magician who just sawed a man's future in half. I didn't say a word. I just placed my glass down, straightened my cuff, and walked out before dessert. Elevator doors closed. No one followed. No one apologized. That's when I knew. Not that she betrayed me. That I was done pretending it mattered to her if she had. For those of you watching, more than 90% of you hear these stories without ever subscribing. That tiny click? It's what fuels the team behind this. Keeps these stories reaching the people who need to hear them. So if you find yourself drawn in, hit that button. It means more than you know. Now back to her little performance. The irony was thick. Vanessa worked in the executive wing, but her rise came courtesy of my money, my introductions, my silence. When this company was nothing but a glorified whiteboard and a promise, I funded their prototype and negotiated their first compliance pass with DoD procurement. And yet there she stood, publicly castrating me to impress a man who got investigated for expense fraud in 2019 and only survived because yes, me, slid a file across the table in a closed-door meeting and said, "You'll find the missing line item here. Next time, don't do business with your cousin's import company." I covered for him. Just once. And only because Vanessa asked. "It'll help my career, babe," she'd said. Just a quick fix. Back then, I believed she meant our career. But at that gala, it was clear, she'd redrawn the map. I was no longer the foundation. I was the obstacle, the relic, the man she could use as a joke to make the CEO feel powerful and make herself look essential. I went home that night and reread a single line from a document I'd revised 2 years ago. Clause 14 shall be triggered upon reputational compromise of key stakeholders in public or recorded forums involving financial leadership misattribution. That clause had a purpose when we wrote it. Prevent hostile takeovers. Protect against whistleblower damage. But that night, that clause had a new job, and Vanessa had just signed its activation with a champagne toast. At 1:43 a.m., I opened the vault. Not the physical one. The one labeled Section E, Contingency Activation. Vanessa never read it. Too many legal words. Too many assumptions that she'd never need to. But she signed it. And that's the thing about people like Vanessa. They assume paper is powerless if it's quiet. They forget who wrote the fine print. And who funded the ink. Vanessa woke up in satin sheets, still buzzing from the gala. She stretched like a cat, kissed her phone screen at a message from Greg, still laughing about last night, and checked our shared calendar. Nothing from me. She smirked. At 9:02 a.m., she sent a text. "Don't be dramatic. You know I was joking." No reply. She assumed I was licking my wounds, sulking in some corner of our oversized house like a cartoon husband with a bruised ego and a spreadsheet. If only. I was 37 miles away, in a glass-walled private office inside a boutique law firm I'd quietly retained 2 years ago. I wasn't licking anything. I was planning. Across from me sat Dana Lynn, my lead tax strategist. Beside her, Frank LeClaire, forensic accountant, ex-SEC. And in the far corner, tapping quietly at a laptop, was Raymond Poole, the calmest man I've ever seen under an IRS jacket. No small talk. No coffee orders. Just the quiet rustle of documents and the muted tap of keystrokes as I unlatched a black folder labeled Section E, Contingency Activation. Vanessa had never seen the folder. She didn't even know it existed. But her signature was inside, twice. Once on the amendment to the prenup, and once on the compliance rider we'd filed with our estate attorney the same week she thought we were updating our will. She signed that document between spa appointments. Said, "Whatever, just tell me where to initial." Page 3, subsection B.1. Trigger conditions. public reputational defamation of primary financial stakeholder in presence of key external stakeholders, i.e., investors, board members, regulatory affiliates, or executive personnel. Gala footage included all four. And more importantly, it was recorded, HD, on the firm's own livestream archive, which meant the contingency was no longer hypothetical. It was live. Dana slid a sheet toward me. "You sure you want to activate the full stack?" I nodded, with prejudice. Raymond didn't blink. "Then we go federal." Vanessa, meanwhile, was laughing over croissants with Greg in the executive conference lounge. They were running through Q1 projections, unaware that 6 flag vendor accounts were already under review. All 6 tied to procurement deals she'd brokered personally, thinking she was being efficient by fast-tracking through non-competitive bid pathways. That efficiency came with signatures, audit trails, and one dumb mistake: emailing Greg from her personal account with the words, "Just push it through, we'll fix it on the back end." That email was archived and printed twice. It sat quietly in a folder Dana had just placed into the stack titled Early Discovery Evidence. But Vanessa? She was still in character. She thought this was just another morning where she wore the pants because I refused to fight. She didn't realize I was already in round 4 of a game she never learned the rules to. She assumed silence meant surrender. What she didn't understand was that the man she called just the checkbook was the same one who set up the offshore trigger trust her stock options relied on. The same man who restructured the corporate charter to include Clause 14, the one she unknowingly referenced in her little champagne monologue. That clause had teeth. Not dramatic ones. Not courtroom drama, primetime TV teeth. Real ones. The kind that locked onto careers and tore slowly. That morning, while Vanessa added animated emojis to her kickoff slides and Greg rehearsed his joke about squeezing margins harder than my ex-wife's attorney, I had already filed a notice with the firm's ethics committee. Anonymous. Timestamped. With attachments. Attachments that included procurement vendor reports showing 28% overbilling, consultant payments to entities with matching IP addresses, and financial statements from a shell LLC Greg swore was dead weight back in 2020. All sourced, legally, from Vanessa's company-issued laptop. She left it open one night. Said she was just finishing slides. I didn't touch it. I just copied the folder titled Q1 Prep for Greg only. If you're thinking, that's a hell of a name for an evidence folder, you're not wrong. By noon, Vanessa had stopped checking her phone. Greg was doing that thing where he locked his jaw whenever someone mentioned compliance. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she probably wondered why I hadn't replied. Because in her world, the checkbook always stays quiet until the balance hits 0, and the overdraft fee comes with a federal seal. 18 months ago, I stood in the hallway outside our bedroom, holding a mug of chamomile tea I knew she'd never drink, listening to the kind of conversation that permanently rewires how you see a person. Vanessa was on the phone with someone, her friend Mallory, maybe, or one of the wine club women she always swore don't really get me. She was lying on the bed, kicking her heels in the air like a teenager, whispering just loud enough to be audible through the cracked door. "No, Tom's harmless. He just funds the machine. The real leadership? That's who I follow." Her voice dropped an octave, smug, conspiratorial. She laughed. "I mean, come on. You've seen Greg in a room. The man owns the floor. Tom walks in, and people think catering's arrived." I didn't flinch, didn't kick the door open or demand an explanation. That would have given her a scene to dismiss, a moment to reframe. "You're overreacting. It's just girl talk." Instead, I walked back to my office and sat down in the dark, let the tea go cold, and stared at the wall for 20 silent minutes. That night didn't break my heart. It rearranged it. Because she wasn't confessing infidelity. She was describing a hierarchy and placing me beneath the man I once kept out of jail with a single line item correction. She wasn't just belittling me. She was outlining a belief system. One where proximity to charisma trumped substance. Where appearances outweighed origin. Where she forgot who actually wrote the checks Greg now autographed with flair. It wasn't about intimacy. It was about succession. The next morning, I made a phone call. "Mike," I said, when he picked up, "You still at the IRS?" A low chuckle. "Field investigations. Midwest Division." "Good. You ever audit a firm you helped build?" Silence. Then, walk me through it. Mike wasn't just a friend. He was one of the sharpest compliance analysts I'd ever known. We came up in the same circles, built networks during the early post-Enron era when everyone scrambled to look clean. He owed me a favor. I didn't even need to ask. We met in a back booth at a place no one under 45 eats lunch. Over whitefish and lukewarm coffee, I gave him a name. Greg Whitmore. I saw Mike's brow twitch. Vanessa's boss, I said. He didn't ask why. He just asked, do you have access? I built their back-end accounting architecture, I replied. What do you think? From there, it became mechanical. I started pulling vendor contracts. Not illegal. I still had clearance. Greg never changed the access logs. He didn't even know how. The man thought SOC audit referred to a community charity program. What I found in the first week was enough to make Mike raise both eyebrows, and he only had one facial expression since 2006. $143,000 paid to a consulting firm in Delaware with no employees. Another $220,000 funneled through a marketing vendor who, when called, said, "Oh, I thought we stopped working with them 2 years ago." Then came the strategic scheduling. Checks cut the day before board meetings, paper trails timed to look clean, but misaligned with internal logs. It wasn't fraud in the cinematic sense. It was death by 1,000 misclassifications, intentional, precise, almost arrogant in its sloppiness. And in every chain of signatures, Vanessa's name. Always second. Always right after Greg's. It was then I realized she hadn't just strayed emotionally. She'd chosen a side. She was betting on his rise and writing off my existence as background capital. Every interaction after that, every time she smiled across the dinner table, every peck on the cheek before bed, was filtered through that revelation. She was staging a slow-motion coup, and she thought I was too dull, too safe, too harmless to notice. But I didn't rage. I didn't even resent. I studied, coldly, quietly, like someone watching a leak in a submarine hull, calculating exactly how long it would take to flood. And when she asked why I seemed so distant lately, I just smiled and said, "Work's been interesting." She laughed. "Well, that makes one of us." I nodded, because I knew, eventually, she'd see just how interesting it would become. At 9:12 a.m. sharp, Greg Whitmore opened the mahogany door to his corner office, the one with the skyline view he'd insisted on upgrading after securing Series C. Even though that round had been quietly salvaged by a bridge loan I orchestrated. He was in his usual Monday uniform, aggressively casual button-down, Rolex too tight on his wrist, and that permanent smirk, like he'd just won a debate no one asked for. He expected a junior exec or maybe Vanessa with a fresh latte. What he got was 4 people who didn't knock twice. 3 attorneys, gray suits, no pleasantries, and 1 man behind them in a crisp black windbreaker, the letters IRSCID embroidered in gold just above his chest. The badge clipped to his belt was dull from use. His face wasn't. "Mr. Whitmore," the lead attorney said, handing over a sealed packet. "These are not accusations. They are findings." Greg's smirk twitched. He glanced at the label on the folder, confidential, ethics compliance summary /IRS submission 8829. Then back at the man in the windbreaker. "Who are you with?" Greg asked, like he didn't already feel the oxygen thin out around him. The man didn't flinch. "Robert Kellen, Assistant Director, IRS Field Investigations." That's when Greg's smile died. Not faded. Died. Like a light bulb that doesn't dim. It just pops. See, Kellen wasn't just some desk jockey. He was the name whispered in compliance circles when things went nuclear. When he showed up, people didn't lawyer up, they packed. Greg tried to recover. This has to be some kind of misunderstanding. "Vanessa, can you?" He turned toward his desk, expecting backup. But Vanessa wasn't there. She was upstairs, prepping for the quarterly review meeting, her phone on silent, unaware that her boss's blood pressure had just spiked to career-ending. Kellen stepped forward. "You'll want to sit down, Mr. Whitmore. This is going to take a while." Greg opened the folder. Inside, a stack of documents tied together with a red binding clip. The top page listed vendor names. Second page, routing numbers. The third, a payment schedule. But the fourth page stopped him cold. It was a photograph from a team building offsite last year. Vanessa on the patio with a glass of wine. Greg beside her, gesturing with a tablet in hand. The caption beneath it, printed neatly. "Verbal confirmation, just push it through. We'll fix the paperwork later." Greg looked up. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Kellen said nothing. Just took a seat across from him like he was settling in for a long afternoon. One of the attorneys, a wiry woman with a cold stare, placed a USB drive on the desk. Full digital logs. You'll find invoice duplication, miscategorized expenditures, and correspondence with foreign vendors not approved under federal contracting guidelines. All signed off under your account. Greg tried to stand. Failed. I didn't know those were being filed. I delegated procurement. Vanessa handles that. Your login credentials were used. The attorney interrupted. Repeatedly. The system logs weren't spoofed. You initiated every approval. Your IP. Your machine. If someone else used them, that's another conversation. But at the moment, Mr. Whitmore, the findings reflect direct involvement. Kellen added, we're not here to negotiate. We're here to notify. Further interviews are scheduled. Greg leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands locked behind his neck. Sweat gathered just below his collar. For a man who loved control, he now looked like a child caught copying from the wrong test in front of the principal and the feds. What he didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that this was just the public tip of what I'd already sent to the IRS 2 months earlier. This wasn't the first contact. It was the first visible contact. The first domino. Behind the scenes, Mike had already pushed through internal flags on 3 of Greg's shell accounts. Vendor cross payments had been silently rerouted and frozen. The LLC in Nevada that Greg thought was clean had tripped a wire built into a reporting protocol I helped design back when we structured the firm's funding platform. Every trigger was now cascading, not just through tax compliance, but through procurement legality and ethics board reviews. This wasn't a raid. It was a coronation. Not for Greg. For me. A quiet one. No balloons. Just truth, folded into packets and delivered with clean hands. And the best part? None of it came from Greg's enemies. It came from his own files. His own team. His own compliance officer, Vanessa. Unwitting, yes. But it was her access, her permissions, her efficient shortcuts that built the very paper trail now suffocating her mentor. I didn't need to hack a thing. I just waited. I watched. I remembered. And I handed the truth to people who'd been starved of it. Greg thought he was untouchable. Thought that money and charm and gala spotlights were insurance policies. Turns out, the real policy was sitting in a file folder with his name on it, sealed, time-stamped, and delivered by people who don't bluff. By the time Kellen stood to leave, Greg's face was white. Not confused. Not angry. Scared. He wasn't the hunter anymore. He was the evidence. 1 week before the IRS knocked, before the attorneys arrived like a firing squad in tailored suits, before Greg's smirk turned to silence, I had already pulled the pin. It was a Tuesday morning. Cold. Quiet. I drove to the office park myself. No assistant, no digital trail. Parked across the street. Slipped a sealed manila envelope into the anonymous drop box marked Internal Ethics Committee, Confidential. Just like we designed back when integrity was a brand pillar instead of a punchline. The folder didn't have a return address. No fingerprints. No origin email. But inside, it had everything. Emails between Greg and 3 procurement vendors. All 3 had similar red flags. Recurring invoices padded by 18 to 22%, service descriptions with vague language like strategic alignment consultation, and, my favorite, PDFs with metadata showing edits made by Vanessa's login after submission. The kicker? 2 of those vendors didn't exist before 2021. They were registered to addresses that cross-referenced with shell corporations I'd already traced to Greg's college roommate, and an events coordinator Greg once called his second brain. All this wasn't dug up via hacking. No breached accounts. No thumb drives full of spyware. Just one night. One forgotten moment. One open laptop left unlocked on the kitchen counter while Vanessa went to shower. She was rushing. Said she was late for some leadership retreat. "Don't touch my stuff," she called out. I didn't. I just mirrored the files. Cloned the contents of a folder labeled Q1 Vendor Cleanup. Inside, expense reports, draft emails, an Excel doc titled AGG Adjustment Plan, and a PDF labeled For Greg Only, Delete After Review. Of course, that last one I printed. Twice. Everything I found fit together too perfectly. This wasn't sloppiness. This was orchestration. And Vanessa? She was complicit, not in the evil genius sense, but in the arrogant, casual sense. The kind that assumes no one is watching because the person who could watch has been downgraded to harmless checkbook. In that envelope I dropped off, I included a redacted whistleblower report. Pre-filled. Filed with the Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs. Timestamped. Notarized. Already uploaded. This submission was just the internal courtesy. One of the last things I slipped in? A side-by-side chart. Authorized vendor invoices versus actual disbursement logs. A delta of $489,212 across 6 months. Every overage approved by Greg. Every document initialed by Vanessa. There was no commentary. No summary letter. Just the facts. Cold. Arranged. The kind of quiet evidence that doesn't need italics or exclamation marks to detonate careers. The ethics committee had no choice. Their shield, the one Greg built by bullying auditors and waving fake transparency like a flag, cracked instantly. Because now there was plausible deniability risk. If they ignored this and it got out, the board would be complicit. Stakeholders would revolt. And more importantly, the insurance company wouldn't pay. That's the real battlefield in corporate sabotage. Not truth, not feelings. Liability coverage. By delivering this folder internally before the feds arrived, I forced the board's hand. They had to treat it as internal discovery, which meant action, which meant Greg, untouchable Greg, was now radioactive. But Vanessa? She still didn't know. She was too busy preparing for the quarterly strategy session, sitting in meetings, rehearsing phrases like cross-functional integration and leading from the front. I watched her from across the glass atrium as she sipped espresso with the CFO and pointed at some dashboard metrics. Confident, relaxed, flirting with power like it couldn't turn on her. She had no idea she was the data trail, that her keystrokes, her edits, were the breadcrumbs that led federal investigators directly to the rot. She thought she was still ascending. She didn't realize the elevator cable had already snapped. Greg would crash first, sure. But Vanessa? She was in the same car. And gravity doesn't discriminate. Monday morning, 8:31 a.m. The firm's weekly compliance review, usually a sleepy ritual of stale pastries and spreadsheet recitations, opened with a printed agenda and an unusually full attendance. The head of internal audit cleared his throat, looked at the sheet in front of him, and said one line that made half the room sit forward and the other half sit very, very still. We're invoking Clause 14. Silence. Not confusion. Recognition. Clause 14. The nuclear clause. The one no one ever mentioned, because to even say it aloud was to admit someone in leadership might one day sabotage the firm's fiduciary integrity. The full wording was long, legal, intentionally sterile. But the meat of it was simple. If a member of the executive team is found complicit in fraud or knowingly misrepresents leadership credit in a manner that damages fiduciary perception, an emergency board review shall be triggered. Vanessa's words at the gala. Thomas is just the checkbook. The brain? He's sitting right here. Were not just an insult. They were a public statement, delivered in front of financial stakeholders, that discredited the man whose name appeared on the original SEC compliance filings. The same man whose signature was on the founding charter. The board didn't care about drama, but they cared deeply about liability. Because that one line, that sentence, wrapped in champagne laughter and live-streamed on the company's own internal media portal, now represented a misrepresentation of executive leadership attribution, which, when paired with the documents already submitted to the ethics committee, constituted grounds for emergency governance intervention. It wasn't even a debate. The board reviewed the video footage, cross-checked the timestamps with the guest list, verified Thomas's official title and past board votes, and within 43 minutes, issued 2 decisions. Immediate suspension of Vanessa Richards, Executive Strategic Partnerships Lead. Formal review and asset freeze of CEO Gregory Whitmore, pending full financial audit. They didn't notify them in person. They didn't need to. HR sent the notifications via secure server, time-stamped and encrypted. One went to Greg's inbox. The other, Vanessa's, was set to auto-forward to legal if unopened for more than 15 minutes. When Vanessa saw the subject line, urgent, board directive, access suspension initiated, she laughed. Then she clicked. Then she didn't laugh. The letter was short, clinical, no space for protest or emotion. Vanessa was to relinquish all firm-issued devices, revoke keycard access, and report to HR by 2 p.m. for a compliance debrief. Her pay was paused. Travel approvals rescinded. All discretionary budgets frozen. She ran to Greg's office. Except Greg wasn't there. Greg, it turned out, had left early. His calendar now marked private, legal consult for the rest of the week. His assistant wouldn't answer questions. Vanessa paced outside the conference room, her heels snapping against the marble like a metronome counting down her career. Her hands shook as she typed into her phone, half texts to Greg, half frantic emails to HR. No reply. She stormed into the executive lounge, where 2 board members sat with unreadable expressions, sipping coffee from white porcelain cups. She asked if they'd seen the message. They had. She asked if they could explain. They wouldn't. Just one sentence, calmly delivered by the older member with tortoiseshell glasses. Clause 14 was built to protect the firm, Vanessa, not you. And the final nail? She turned to see the newest associate counsel, fresh from Columbia Law, barely 30. walking past holding a printed copy of her gala speech transcript. Highlighted, annotated, stamped. That was when the smugness cracked. She grabbed her bag, practically ran to her office, locked the door, and dialed Greg. Voicemail. She tried again, then again. Still voicemail. Then she checked their last text thread. His last message? Let me know when you've buttered them up. Winky face. 12 hours later, the board issued an internal notice to all senior staff. No press. No statement. Just a memo. In accordance with Section 4.2 of the Charter, and pursuant to Clause 14, effective immediately, the following individuals have been relieved of executive duties pending audit review. Her name was second. No explanation. No goodbye. Just a quiet erasure. Surgical, fast, and irreversible. And in the corner of the boardroom, tucked into a legal folder marked Foundation Docs, Original, sat the charter Vanessa and never read. The one I helped write. Back when I still believed she'd be the kind of person to protect it. Turns out, she was the reason it needed protecting in the first place. The room was painfully cold, like someone had set the thermostat to match the mood. Frosted glass. Executive chairs too expensive to be comfortable. Bottled water lined up like dominoes in front of name placards. But only one placard was missing, Thomas Richards. He wasn't coming. Vanessa sat stiffly at the polished walnut table, her lawyer beside her, a man who usually swaggered through settlements like he was auditioning for a streaming legal drama. Today, he was pale and quiet, flipping pages without speaking. Greg sat opposite, hunched in a way that made his custom-tailored blazer look like it belonged to someone else. His face had gone slack since the compliance notice. The tremor in his left hand hadn't stopped in 3 days. The chairwoman cleared her throat. Let's begin. Thomas's proxy, a tall, angular man in a charcoal suit with zero expression, stood and opened a slim leather briefcase. He didn't offer small talk. He didn't introduce himself with a joke. He simply pulled out a document stack with quiet finality. Per the authority granted under power of counsel, Mr. Richards presents the following materials for review by the full board. He laid them out like weapons on a table. First, stock transfer history. A ledger of internal trades, dated back for years. Highlighted entries showed Greg liquidating small tranches into a holding company owned by a woman named Yvonne Whitmore, his second cousin. The SEC might call it layering. We called it predicted. Second, forensic accounting report. Prepared by Frank Leclerc. Cross-referenced vendor payments, project delays, and project-level financial statements. Findings: 26% markup discrepancies, 5 falsified vendor contracts, 3 duplicate invoice trails. Greg didn't even try to hide it. Vanessa's initials were on 7 approval lines. Third, ethics filing. Anonymous submission. Confirmed by timestamp and hash verification. Notarized. Complete with email printouts and internal calendar records from Vanessa's device. Fourth, prenup compliance clause. Page 6, subsection C.3. In the event that either spouse publicly discredits the financial contribution or strategic ownership of the other in front of stakeholders, said party forfeits claim to assets derived from joint enterprise equity. Vanessa blinked hard. Her lawyer whispered, "This isn't enforceable." The board's general counsel cut in. "It's already been reviewed and upheld under Delaware corporate law." And finally, the fifth item, board voting record. It was the shortest. Just one line. Motion to suspend Gregory Whitmore and Vanessa Richards from executive authority and all firm-facing representation roles, effective immediately. The vote tally, 6-0. Vanessa swallowed. "You mean we're being investigated?" The chairwoman didn't raise her voice. She didn't gloat. She simply said, "No, you two no longer speak for this firm." Greg slumped back in his chair like the sentence had weight. Vanessa stared at the table. Her lawyer opened his mouth, then shut it again. "What about Thomas?" she asked finally, voice cracking. The proxy packed up the documents, smooth and deliberate. "Mr. Richards has no further statements. His filings speak for themselves." "Then why isn't he here?" she snapped, desperate now, her composure fraying at the edges. "If he wanted this, he should have come. Faced me." "He did," said the chairwoman. "He just did it better." Outside, reporters had started to gather. Nothing official, just rumors circling. A few curious texts from junior staff. One board assistant had quietly updated the firm's internal directory. Both Greg and Vanessa's names were gone. Vanessa leaned forward. "I made one comment. One joke at a gala. That's all." The chairwoman raised an eyebrow. That joke triggered Clause 14, which triggered a compliance audit. which uncovered $800,000 in financial anomalies tied directly to your authorizations. If it was just a joke, it was the most expensive one this company's ever heard. Greg didn't defend her, didn't say a word. He knew the shape of the battlefield now, and he knew the man who laid the mines had already walked away before they went off. Vanessa rose suddenly. I built this firm. I brought in 5 contracts this year alone. You were never on the cap table. The proxy replied without looking up. You just held a title someone else paid for. She stood in silence, jaw tight, trying to breathe through what she couldn't refute. Not just that she lost, but that Thomas didn't need to show up to win. He wasn't there to gloat. No final line. No vengeance monologue. He simply sent his receipts, his filings, his silence, and they did the talking for him. The lounge was the kind of place you only find if you've already been invited. Low light, deep booths, wood paneling so old it probably had its own trust fund. No music, just the occasional rattle of ice in a glass and the soft scrape of leather soles across Persian rugs. Vanessa arrived 10 minutes early. Not because she wanted to, because she needed to. Her lawyer had stopped answering calls after the board meeting. Greg hadn't returned a single message since. And HR? They'd shipped a box of her things from the office with a cover letter that ended in permanent severance, non-appealable. So now, here she was, trying to look composed. A navy silk blouse, subtle makeup, a smile practiced too long in the car mirror. Waiting. When Thomas walked in, he didn't look like revenge. He looked, well, like himself. Trim. Calm. Same pressed button-down he wore when they used to host client dinners together, back when she still introduced him as the reason this company even exists. He didn't greet her with a hug, just a polite nod, like you'd give a neighbor at a funeral. She tried to disarm him first. You look good. Thomas didn't sit immediately. He slid into the booth slowly, placing a small black envelope on the table between them like it weighed more than it should. She tried again. Look, I know I went too far. I was drinking. Everyone was laughing. I didn't mean. We're not here to discuss the gala, he said. No edge in his voice. No raised eyebrow. Just a simple, firm line. She hesitated. Okay, then what? He pushed the envelope toward her. Inside, divorce papers. Vanessa blinked. Wait. Thomas, can we? No settlement, he said calmly. She opened the first page. His name. Her name. Filed. Already signed on his end. Thomas, come on. You don't need to do this. We can fix. You triggered Clause 9b. She frowned, flipping through the documents until she found it. There, in neat legal type. Clause 9b. In the event of public defamation of the other spouse in a professional capacity, specifically in front of fiduciary stakeholders, all rights to spousal equity shall be considered null and void. It hit her in slow motion. The gala, the laughter, the mic, her words. Wait, this isn't enforceable. You can't just. I can, he replied gently. You signed it. Same week we updated the will, remember? You said you didn't want to read the details. Just wanted to get to your yoga class. She sat frozen, clutching the page. He continued, voice steady. The condo in your name? That was part of your executive package. The one that was dissolved last week. Her eyes darted. But the car, leased through the firm. Corporate benefit. So was the black card. You put me on that account. As a courtesy, he said, still calm. Not a contract. She looked up at him then, and for the first time, really saw it. Not anger. Not hurt. Just removal. Detachment so complete it left no cracks. You're really doing this, she whispered. I'm just finalizing what you started. But I built. You performed, he corrected. I built. The waitress appeared out of nowhere and asked if they were ready to order. Vanessa shook her head. Thomas just raised a hand and said, We're all set. Thanks. The silence afterward was heavy, but not awkward. It was the kind of silence that comes when one person is already past grieving and the other is just realizing the death. She reached out, fingers brushing the edge of the papers. You're not even going to let me fight this? You can fight whatever you want, he said. But the court won't recognize a share you never actually held. I was your wife. You were also an employee, he said flatly. And when you stood in front of stakeholders and credited another man as the firm's real backbone, you broke the spine of both roles. She looked down. The light above the table cast shadows across the document like prison bars. I didn't know it would matter that much, she said quietly. I know, he said. That was the problem. She tried one last time. Is there anything left you want to say to me? He paused, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small metal key, placed it gently on the table. For the storage unit. Everything in there's yours. Letters, photos, that painting you loved from our trip to Lisbon. I didn't want to decide what you'd keep. Vanessa didn't touch it, didn't move, just stared at the key like it might explain how everything unraveled this fast. Thomas stood. Take care of yourself, Vanessa. And with that, he walked out. No parting jab, no grand final line. Just the same quiet steadiness she once mistook for weakness. The lifestyle she flaunted, the designer bags, the luxury retreats, the first-class flights and champagne toasts, had always felt like hers. She only realized now it was all leased. And the leaseholder just walked away. 2 weeks later, on a Thursday morning that began too quiet and stayed that way, Vanessa answered a knock that didn't wait long enough to feel casual. Just 3 sharp raps on her condo door. No one visible through the peephole. She opened it to find a man in a navy windbreaker and slacks, badge clipped to his belt. No smile, no greeting. Just a thick white envelope held out with gloved fingers and a clipboard for her signature. For Ms. Richards, he said flatly. She hesitated. What is this? The man didn't blink. Final notice. Confirmed delivery. Please sign. She scribbled her name with a trembling hand and took the envelope. Stamped on the front. Final. All caps. All business. She shut the door, peeled it open, and found herself staring at the exact thing she tried to outrun in cocktail dresses and CEO proximity. Reality. The first page. Notice of Federal Inquiry. IRS Division 67. A formal notification that she was under investigation as a potential facilitating party to procurement misappropriation. Dates, amounts, digital access logs, all flagged. The second, employment termination letter, effective immediately. Signed by the acting general counsel. 2 lines. Your role is hereby terminated with prejudice. Do not return to firm premises. All access credentials have been revoked. No severance. No continuation clause. Just legal exile. The third, divorce decree, finalized. Dated, signed, and court-stamped. Thomas's name listed under petitioner. Hers under respondent. No alimony. No asset distribution. Clause 9 cited as precedent. And finally, the last page, almost cruel in its brevity. Statement of marital equity claim. $0. She stared at that number for what felt like hours. No emotion, just static. She dropped the envelope. Papers scattered across the tile like broken promises. One floated gently under the dining table. She didn't reach for it. Her phone was on the kitchen counter. She grabbed it, hands shaking, and called Greg. Voicemail. She tried again. Voicemail. She sent a message. Greg, I need to talk. Please. 3 dots appeared, then vanished, then nothing. She opened their last text thread. The last thing he'd written to her was 3 weeks ago. They'll forget this in a month. She now realized they wasn't the board, or the media, or the firm. It was her. He meant he would forget her. She moved to the window, pushed aside the curtain. Across the street, a moving truck sat idling at the curb. Not hers. She hadn't packed anything. It took her a second to recognize the driver, Thomas's assistant. Directing 2 movers loading a sleek, dark wood desk and a series of file boxes into the truck. No Thomas in sight, because he didn't need to be. Everything happening now was already in motion, weeks, maybe months ago. She hadn't noticed the wind changing. She was too busy basking in light she didn't own. She pressed her forehead to the glass and whispered, I didn't mean it. But there was no one to hear her. No laughing executives. No gala crowd. No boss to smirk and squeeze her hand. Just her reflection in the glass, framed by a condo she no longer owned, paid for by a firm that no longer employed her, next to a phone that no longer buzzed with relevance. She thought she'd climbed a ladder. Turns out, it was scaffolding, borrowed, brittle, and not built to hold weight. And now, it was gone. 3 months later, the firm issued a press release at exactly 6 a.m. Eastern. No fanfare, no dramatic teaser video or inflated mission statement. Just a stark, 5-word subject line. Leadership restructuring, effective immediately. The release named names. First, the departures. Greg Whitmore, terminated with board-cited gross misrepresentation of fiduciary duty. Vanessa Richards, dismissed under ethical violations and policy breach. No elaboration, just legal fact. Then came the replacement. Chair of the board, Thomas H. Richards. No quote from him. No soundbite. Just his name. Positioned neatly above a new corporate subheading. Founding financial architect, compliance strategist, and silent equity principal. The press tried to reach him. He declined interviews. The most anyone got was a 3-sentence statement from his spokesperson. Mr. Richards has no interest in media spectacle. His priority remains stabilizing the firm's compliance posture and restoring stakeholder trust. He thanks the board for its confidence. Internally, things changed fast. Ethics training, mandatory. Vendor review processes, rewritten. The culture of performative power that had once defined the executive floor, dismantled in weeks. The biggest change was in the lobby, just past the security desk, where the old firm motto had once been stenciled in pretentious sans serif. Innovation through audacity. There now hung a single framed quote, etched into smoked glass. Power doesn't raise its voice. It just signs the checks you forgot it wrote. No attribution, no fanfare, but everyone knew who wrote it. Vanessa saw it by accident. She was on a coffee run, interning, technically, though the agency called it contract administrative support. No title, no office, just a badge with a QR code and a non-disclosure agreement stapled to her onboarding folder. She hadn't been inside the building since the termination. But that day, her supervisor sent her across town to deliver marketing samples to a vendor. The vendor's office was on the third floor of her old building. She walked through the lobby half-conscious, muscle memory guiding her feet. It wasn't until the elevator dinged and she turned around that she noticed it, the quote. She stood there, clutching a cardboard tray of cappuccinos, frozen. It wasn't the words that hit her. It was the framing. Simple, understated, heavy. People walked past her without recognition. No one paused. No one stared. She wasn't a scandal anymore. She was just background. That was worse. She pressed the elevator button and tried not to look back. But her eyes kept returning to the quote, to the reflection of herself in the glass, to the name on the plaque outside the boardroom. She could still see through the glass wall. Richards, T.H. Chair. He hadn't taken revenge. He'd taken position. Not publicly. Not with rage. Just with precision. She reached the third floor, dropped off the samples, and rode back down in silence. No one asked her why she looked pale. No one remembered her laugh from the galas. No one saw the woman who once toasted with executives like she owned the table. She walked past the quote again, this time slower, and whispered, just under her breath. He meant every word. But again, no one was listening. Outside, she waited 10 minutes for a rideshare that never arrived. The sun caught the glass facade of the building behind her. The quote shimmered faintly in the reflection. She turned away from it, because it wasn't hers anymore, and never really was.